The goalkeeper. They also call him doorman, keeper, bouncer, or netminder, but he might as well be called penitent, martyr, or punching bag. They say, where he walks, never again will the grass ever grow. He's alone, condemned to watch the game from afar. Trapped between the three posts as his only companion, he awaits his own execution by firing squad. He doesn't score goals. He's there to prevent them from being scored. Football fiesta is a goal, and the striker sparks delight, and the goalkeeper, the killjoy, snuffs it out. He wears the number 1 on his back. The first to pay? No. The first to be paid? No. The first to pay. It's always the keeper's fault. And even if it isn't, he still gets to blame. Because when any other player commits a foul or a penalty, they leave him there in the emptiness of the immensity of the empty net, condemned to await his executioner. And when the team has a bad afternoon, he's the one who pays the bills, repairing the sins of others under a rain of flying balls. The other players can blow it once in a while, or often, but they redeem themselves with a masterful pass, a spectacular volley, or a well-placed goal. But not him. The crowd never forgives the goalkeeper. Was he drowned out by a fake? Left looking ridiculous? Did the ball squid? Did his fingers of steel turn to silk? With a single slip-up, a goalkeeper can lose a match or lose a championship. And the crowd suddenly forgets all of his great feats and condemn him to eternal disgrace. Damnation will follow him to the end of his days. This is a beautiful text written by Eduardo Galeano, which I think perfectly summarizes what it feels like to work in information security. And I think that's unfair. But I think I get where it comes from. It's because security is expected. Security is an expected feature of software products. We expect security when we buy a product, like a car or a phone. We expect security when we buy a service, like banking or social media. We even expect security when we buy a free service, like Wi-Fi at the airport. And it's our job, the goalkeeper, to fulfill this expectation. And that is exceptionally hard. A few years ago, PwC came out with a really interesting research. They asked consumers, from their perspective, how do they feel about information security? They asked them many questions. And one of them was, what types of businesses do consumers trust the most? And this is what they say. And you can see here, these are kind of like the usual suspects. Hospitals and banks, healthcare providers, insurance companies, government, information technology, etc., etc. And now my question to you is, this is an information security crowd. Which ones of you, let me try to create a shadow. So from here to the right, which ones of you serve or work with or have clients which are there? Banks, insurance companies, government, IT, healthcare providers. Exactly. So they hire us because businesses can trust mostly these industries. And therefore, that's where we, information security professionals tend to be hired. Not in, agricultural sector, automotive, sports, startups, etc. Unless a startup is servicing these, which is the case for some of us. And the interesting thing, if you see, none of these services which businesses trust are actually security. They are something else. They are banks. It's a different business. They sell banking. They sell insurance. They sell healthcare. Government service citizens, sell IT, etc. It's not security. So we are not exactly in the same realm as the business that's paying for our salaries. And this has led to a culture of burnout, which was mentioned also earlier this morning. And CISOs are starting to feel it too. CISOs are starting to get burnouts, mostly because they are the goalkeepers, and there's so many shots on target that they try to save. especially from people who do not understand what we do and do not understand what it takes to secure. And because security is expected, it's that annoying thing that it's not the need for us to arise. Hopefully, if we're doing our jobs right, it's not constantly appearing. We're in the business of no news is good news. So if we do our jobs very well, you never see an incident or a significant one. So which makes it harder for us to justify why do we deserve the big bucks because we're doing our job so well. And they're like, maybe the world is not as scary as you think it is. So I'm just going to cut your budget 20% and then we're all going to burn out. And what I find, so I take a large interest in emerging technologies, and together with my friend Arno Via, we wrote the book, which I encourage you all to buy in triplicate. And the interesting thing about this technology we've been discussing so far is when the technology is here, it's our responsibility to secure it. When the technology exists, when the technology is mainstream. So when banks exist and people trust them, as we saw in a couple of slides ago, then it's our job to fulfill that expectation. When governments exist and they work, it's our job to secure them. When IT infrastructure exists and it works and it's used by everyone, it's a mainstream technology. It's our responsibility to fix it. We are the goalkeepers of that technology. But how is it different with emerging technologies? If this is true for mainstream technologies, how is it different for emerging technologies? So first of all, what is emerging technology? Not a rhetorical question. I would like you to start out shouting out answers. What do you think is emerging technology? AI is an example of emerging technology. I like that. It's chapter number 3 on the book. I encourage you to buy in triplicate. But it is definitely an example of an emerging technology. What is emerging technology? Why is that emerging technology and not, say, banking? Banking is very much mainstream, right? So maybe why is that? What is
emergent? Because it's changing the playing field.
Oh.
Something that we call emergent.
Oh, I love that definition. It's changing. I don't know if you heard it. He said that it's emerging because it's changing the playing field. I love that. What other definitions? What other examples? Yeah. Blockchain, another great example. That's chapter 8. So, if you don't know how to secure it, it's right there. Blockchain also another great example. It's not yet mainstream, right? It's not yet wildly used. The blockchain is this decentralized database. Basically, you add on decentralized database. You can have different flavors, but for the most part, we still, as human beings, still store our data in centralized databases. Not yet in blockchain. There are certain use cases, but not yet fully mainstream. Another example. So there. Quantum computing, chapter 2. So, also another example. So, mainstream computers like the one I'm using here, and the one that's being used to project, they're widely available. And of course, if those goes wrong, we are the goalkeepers that have to secure it, right? That's why you all have jobs, is to secure computers. But quantum computer, it's an emerging technology. It's not quite here yet. I saw some other, XR. So, augmented reality, right? Chapter 6. So, augmented reality, also something that's, coming, and it's not quite here yet. Another example?
Combat drones.
Combat drones. Well, we do have a chapter on vertical takeoff and landing, which is chapter 7. But combat drones, also another example of emerging technology. For the most part, warfare is still fought in traditional ways. I love all of those definitions. And to me, emerging technology, it's kind of one where it's not widely used. And I try to also, in the process of writing the book, we try to figure out why is it that's not yet here? Some of these technologies are really, really impactful, right? And they're really promising, but they're not quite here yet. So let me tell you a story. In 1857, the first lift started operating in New York. New York started growing, the thriving emerging city that New York was at the time. It's 1857, this was almost 200 years ago. The first lift was invented. It was a department store, it had 5 floors. And with this new technology came a new job, which was lift operators. And their job was to come into the elevator, to let people in. They would welcome them, and they'll be very nice and polite. This job tended to be performed by women. And they would operate a number of levers inside the elevator that would control how the direction of the lift is going, up or down, and the speed at which it's going, and also to stop it in whatever position you wanted. This was all very fine and well, and the lift operator was a job for many, many generations. Fast forward to 1945, just after World War II, so almost 100 years after, and they went on strike, demanding better jobs and better pays. The entire city came to a standstill. People who've been watching these lift operators operate the levers inside the lift, they were all afraid of using it. They were not sure how to use this particular technology. They were afraid. So nobody used it, which brought the entire city to a standstill. The governor had to be involved. Within a week, the situation got solved, and agreement was made. But this particular event did provide a catalyst for the invention of a new technology, automated lifts, where the people go in, they press a button, and then automatically it reaches particular stages. And that eventually became mainstream. That was, at the time, an emerging technology, automatic lifts, and eventually became mainstream. By the 1970s, the last lift operator had retired. And nowadays, we can't even think of an idea of vertically transporting people without it being automated. It's actually the safest form of human transportation is lifts. Vertical transportation of human beings is the safest form of transportation. And also from an energy perspective, the most efficient. And this story does make me think about if automating this operation of these vehicles made them more safe, it makes me wonder when are we going to have autonomous vehicles? Autonomous vehicles are pretty much an emerging technology, but we all came here, and we all came here probably on a device operated by a human, either ourselves when we cycled here, or if you're wealthy enough to pay for parking, you drove here, or if you came with ENS or tram or whatever, there was a human being driving it. Autonomous vehicles are very much an emerging technology. But why? The product market fit is there. Everybody would love to have it. But why? It's not safe yet. It's not safe yet, right? It still scares us, the idea of getting into autonomous vehicles. It has not yet been proven that the vehicles are autonomous. When that occurs, when somebody from the security field here figures out a way to make that particular emerging technology safe, then that will become mainstream. That particular technology will become mainstream. And the truth of the matter is that technologies keep on being emerging until the public trusts them. There are two ways where the public builds trust. One of them is there's a product market fit. In other words, there's an emerging technology that solves a problem. And then the other one is, do we trust it? Do we feel safe? Not all emerging technology succeeds. We're still waiting for the flying car. That really hasn't made a thing. There's a company that sells flying cars. Literally, it's a car that you drive, and then you get to a runway, and then it extends the wings, and then you can fly it, and it flies. It has a particular range, and it's hasn't really picked up, but it's been around. So this company's been selling this for more than 10 years, which I think it's this car, this vehicle. I'm not sure if it can call it a car, but it's legally allowed to drive in a highway in the US, and it's legally allowed to fly. But the flying car is still, something that's not quite there yet, even though in science fiction we've been dreaming about this for about 100 years, I guess. Another one was, a good example is a Segway, which was going to be the thing that was going to revolutionize human transport, etc., etc. That never really went anywhere. It wasn't really necessarily the security. I think there's no product market fit. It kind of solved the solution solved the problem that most people didn't have, I guess. And also Google Glass, which you might recall, was an attempt to be launched by sometimes very innovative companies and very knowledgeable companies with very smart people come up with ideas that become emerging tech, and they don't go anywhere. That happens here again. A lack of product markets, product market fit. But let's try to go predict the future and try to figure out which of these emerging technologies, which you mentioned all of them, which ones will become mainstream. So to do futurology, to try to predict the future, I try to go to the past and try to see what the past can be teaching me. And in 1930, John Maynard Keynes arguably the best economist of the 20th century, and certainly one of the best economists in the history of the world, published a paper, called it Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren, 1930s. And he predicted that by the end of the century, humanity would work just 15 hours a week. His arguments were compelling. First of all, he thought that there was technology was evolving to a point that was dramatically increasing our productivity. And he also predicted that we as human beings value leisure time significantly. And therefore, we would only need to work 15 hours by the end of the 20th century. We would only need to work 15 hours to fulfill the needs that we have. While that is true, Keynes failed to recognize that at the end of the 20th century and in the 21st, we want a far more comfortable life than the ones enjoyed, far more comfortable and far healthier life than the ones enjoyed by our ancestors. He also failed to account for capitalism, I would argue, because being a system that definitely pushes workers to not work just 15 hours, but a lot more. And I think he also failed to predict the fact that some jobs do require expertise that takes a lot more than 15 hours a week. I can imagine a surgeon cannot be a surgeon if they only work 15 hours a week. It takes a lot of practice time. You really need to put in the hours. And it's not just medical, of course. Even in our fields, I don't think we could do our job 15 hours a week. At least we wouldn't be as productive as we are. And it's not just him that failed to predict things. I remember an interesting quote from 2004. It's 20 years ago. Bill Gates said, 2 years from now, spam will be solved. Well, there's a billion-dollar industry trying to still solve this problem, so it's not exactly solved. Another interesting quote from Albert Einstein. There's not the slightest indication that nuclear energy will ever be obtainable. It would mean that the atom would have to be shattered at will. He said this in 1932. 13 years later, the populations of Nagasaki and Hiroshima would beg to differ, as would the significant part of the developed world, which relies on exactly this technology to power our lives. Now, I am not smarter at predicting the future than these people, so I don't know exactly which of the emerging technologies will fulfill, but I can analyze a mainstream technology which in my lifetime has become mainstream, which is cloud computing. And I don't know if you can see the graph perfectly, but this is a graph of the AWS revenue from 2009 to 17. And it goes from 0, here's a 5 billion. This is per each one of the quarters. And you can see that kind of like there's a relatively slow rise. There's a plateau here around the year 2013, 14. And then it really took off. Nowadays, AWS, I think their revenue is around 70 billion a year. Just AWS alone. I'm not talking about all the other cloud computing providers. And for me, what's interesting about this is I was there working for the same bank I'm working today, which is ABN AMRO. I started working around the year 2010, and I remember cloud computing as being this emerging technology that's really cool and it provides flexibility, and there's going to be a thing called Agile, which we'll implement later, and it's really going to be great for that. And everybody in the cybersecurity department and the IT department and everybody everywhere went, I don't know, I'm scared, what about my data? Is it not in my systems? I don't like this too much, I'm afraid. And our concerns were legitimate. I mean, it was fair to think all of those things. I think it was fair to think all of those things. Also because banks are risk averse, as they should be, because when banks embrace risk, then it's not just the bank shareholders who suffer if things go bad. So it's a good thing that banks tend to be risk averse. But I remember there was a time around, I guess, 2013, 14, where the security person figured out a way to prove that this technology is safe. And when that happened, it ballooned because the product market fit was there. So it's the role of the security guy, I think, that to make technologies go from emerging to mainstream. And why is it that it's good to embrace technologies? For the companies you work for, why is it that it's good to embrace the emerging technologies and not embrace them later when they become mainstream and potentially your competitors have embraced them while they were still emerging? I have a few examples. First of all, Netflix. So AWS started in 2006. They adopted AWS in 2008, which is even before this graph began. The adoption of cloud technology proved to be the competitive advantage that Netflix got, because it enabled them to create virtual machines on the fly and destroy them on the fly, and to be able to stream, and then streaming eventually overtook everything. And you know how what happened to Blockbuster, you know what happened to the rivals of this. But they started adopting this way before it became mainstream. Cloud computing is mainstream to this day, but that's only been happening in the past 10 years or so. They started embracing it a lot earlier, and they embraced it securely. They made it secure. Being Netflix and being a startup, I'm sure they can embrace more risks than, say, traditional companies like banks. But embracing the emerging technology while it was still emerging proved to be the competitive advantage. In 2012, Tesla started having over-the-air software updates. This is from Wire. I don't know if you can see it, but it's from September 24th, 2012. And nowadays, it's very much, I don't have a Tesla, I have a Volkswagen, and my Volkswagen does over-the-air software patches, but, Tesla started doing this when it was still very much an emerging technology. Nowadays, it's very much mainstream, right? Our phones update during the night, and you don't even need to worry about that. It's fantastic, but nowadays, it's mainstream. Tesla started adopting this when it was still emerging. And if you think about Airbnb, which started in 2008, and kind of like embracing at the time, very weird new technology or new idea of online trust mechanisms. And also Spotify, and the idea of suggesting things you might like based on things you've done before, which, so started in 2006, so almost 20 years ago, and started embracing this at the time emerging technology, to a certain extent still today an emerging technology, but started embracing this. And of course, there are many other examples like Uber Eats or Amazon or Netflix, of course, that have a similar thing. Embracing emerging technologies for their clients or for the companies you work for can be the competitive edge. And it's interesting because, as we all know, we all work in security, we understand security very well. But we work for banks and IT companies and healthcare providers, which don't necessarily speak their language, and they don't necessarily speak ours. That's why we tend to be the goalkeeper. But emerging technology can be the thing that makes us go from goalkeeper to being the striker. Because if you can be the one that goes to your company now and say, there's a new emerging technology, I know how to make it secure. Are you afraid of using it? Don't worry, I'm here to the rescue. You're not going to be the goalkeeper, you're going to be the striker. And the strikers get paid more. And are more famous. And if I think about, for instance, about Gen AI, and I'll cover AI in a second, but if I think about Gen AI, when ChatGPT started, a couple of years ago, at my bank, everybody in the security department and throughout the bank were like, the block, nobody can use ChatGPT. For legitimate reasons, right? Where's my data going to go? Am I going to teach that algorithm something? Somebody can prompt something like, hey, tell me everything you know about ABN AMRO Bank, and then, they have this vulnerability, and I coded this for them, and that was wrong, and could it spit out all kinds of things which are very dangerous. So we immediately went to I don't know mode, I'm afraid mode, I'm scared mode, and not use it at the moment it came out. Now, eventually we, as a bank grew, we understood, and, we figured out a way to secure it, and therefore we now have, by now, hundreds, I think, of Gen AI applications running throughout the bank, which is really exciting. And AI, specifically of all the emerging technologies, when I asked you what's an emerging technology, the first thing that was shot out was AI. And I think AI is a particularly interesting technology because it provides us, the security people, with a good opportunity, a bad opportunity, and an ugly opportunity. And it provides us these opportunities because AI is ripe to change our lives and to have a dramatic disruptive effect on our society, on our processes, and in everything that we do. And the reason AI does this, if you think about it, is because the pace of change has never been this fast. GenAI started writing a few human understandable things a couple of years ago. You can now prompt it. You can now have a conversation with ChatGPT. I don't know if you've ever tried that. You can have a conversation, say, hey, how are you? Can you tell me what's this, this, and that? You can interrupt it and say, no. I'm having an argument with my friend. He's thinking A and I'm thinking B, but she said this, the other thing. And it understands that I'm talking about three separate people and who is me and who is he and who is she. And, but she said this and he said that. And it's quite reactive, like in real time, which is fantastic. This is happening. And now we can also prompt GenAI and say, generate the video for me. You've seen that thing of I want to see a lady and walking around in Tokyo and look at it. It looks like it's filmed and it's not generated by AI. The pace of change has never been this fast. Yet it will never be this slow again. The pace of change has never been this fast, yet it will never be this slow again. And what GenAI has done is dramatically lower the entry point into AI. AI has been around in academia for generations. It has been around in industry for well over 20 years. You saw a few examples with Spotify, AWS, and Netflix, etc. But what GenAI did is dramatically lower. I'm speaking to mostly a technical crowd, but usually when I speak to a non-technical crowd, I ask them, who here, can you raise your hands if you've ever created a machine learning model? Have you ever done neural networks? And maybe 2 people raise their hands or something. I say, okay, who here has used GenAI? And everybody does. And I say, well, we're all AI developers now. GenAI has dramatically lowered. We used to have millions of AI engineers in the world, and now we have billions because of GenAI. And that's why I think it's creating this environment that's ripe for a good opportunity, a bad opportunity, and an ugly opportunity for us in the security field. Let's look at the good opportunity first. AI has very idiosyncratic ways of working, which means that the way you secure it is significantly different than the traditional things. If you think about it, when you conduct a penetration test and you find a buffer overflow, if you know codes and if you know compilers and if you know how C works, you know how memory allocation works, and if you know that particular technology, you know how to abuse it and you can find your buffer overflows or your SQL injections or your cross-site scripting or whatever. But in AIs, the things are different. So if you know code well, you know how to exploit code, and if you know data well, you know how to exploit data. There's many attacks, but one of the coolest ones is called adversarial attacks. If you see a self-driving car and it looks at one of these things, it will correctly identify an octagonal shape, red background, STOP written in white, reads stop, and it will conclude with a very high probability that it's looking at the stop sign and therefore instruct the car to stop. However, if you put these stickers exactly where they are, the same machine learning model will conclude with a very high probability of success that it's looking at the rectangular sign in white, and it says speed limit 45. What? It doesn't see red. It's amazing. It concludes with a very high significant thing. So what happens at that stop sign? The car is going to accelerate. And it's going to accelerate for every car at that stop sign. You just have to put those stickers. This is called an adversarial attack. There are ways of solving this. But if you don't know AI, I would encourage you to understand data, understand machine learning models, and understand how adversarial attacks work, because your companies that are using AI now might be vulnerable to this. And when I talk in my bank and somebody says, wouldn't it be great if I just figured out a way to, give loans automatically based on all the data that I have of, decades of this? I'm like, I have to check for adversarial attacks. Somebody somewhere is going to put weird characters in the description field, and the system is going to approve a loan for you can pay back in 1,000,000 years at negative 10% interest rate. And no, I don't want that. That's just one example. But if your companies are using AI, it might be vulnerable to adversarial attacks. And I would dare to say, if they don't know security, it is vulnerable to adversarial attacks. But you're the security heroes, you're the emerging tech heroes, and if you understand this, and you understand how to counter it, then you will be that hero that says, are you using AI? I'm going to accelerate you further. And we're going to beat our competitors. That's the first example. Another idiosyncratic example in AI is called model inversion. Lots of times our intellectual property are actually models, AI models that we built, and they do certain things. Well, there's an attack called model inversion where an adversary can create a different machine learning algorithm in their side, feed it the output of your AI, and try to figure out what are the parameters that are configuring yours. In other ways, stealing your intellectual property, only based on the outputs that you are providing for your AI. There are ways of blocking this, and there are ways of doing this differently, but you'd have to know what it is. And if your developers are using AI, and that's the core of the business that you're selling, I can assure you it's very likely vulnerable to model inversion. But you're the security heroes, you're the emerging tech heroes, if you know how this works, then you will be the ones that actually make this secure and enabling your business to accelerate faster. You see, you're going from the goalkeeper to the striker. Third one that I'm particularly worried about, but there's a lot more. It's data leakage, especially with Gen AI. So the example that you might prompt things to a Gen AI solution that says, hey, can you help me with this, and that? And, a good example, I think Mikko Hamppanen said this once, we are more trustworthy, or we're truthful. We are more truthful to our search engines than we are to our spouses. We feed these algorithms a lot of information about ourselves. So the worst thing you can do is kind of like, oh, you tell me everything you know about Tiago. I might say, well, Tiago is a published author and he works for ABN AMRO. And did I tell you about this skin rash he has? Like, no. I didn't want you to say that. That was private information. But if we prompt ChatGPT or an LLM living outside that might learn something about it, if we tell ChatGPT to create code for us, and we don't know what we're doing, we might be susceptible to this. And of course, the Gen AI LLM providers, they try to address this exact problem. There's $1 billion industry now trying to circumvent the exact protections they create there. Why are these all good opportunities for us? Well, it's good opportunities for us because we get to keep in business as security people, and we get to be the strikers every once in a while, because I'm sick and tired of just playing the goalkeeper. Those are the good opportunities. Now for the bad opportunities. Gen AI has dramatically lowered the entry point into AI, and it also did that for bad people. And one of my favorite stories that happened in recent times was with the Maersk. I think you can raise your hands. You know what happened here? You probably all do. Well, not too many. Well, there was a ransomware. These people needed to install a patch, and they didn't. But that's it in a nutshell. But the interesting story here is that Maersk wasn't the target. They were innocent bystanders to a conflict in Eastern Europe, because they had to do business with the Ukraine. Somebody attacked some hackers affiliated with the Russian government attacked the Ukrainian tax authority, implemented a virus there. Anybody who would have to download the software from the Ukrainian tax authority would potentially be infected unless they installed the Microsoft patch, which was widely available, but Maersk didn't. And then they installed it on their systems because they had to fulfill tax obligations in the Ukraine, one of many countries where they conduct business, of course. And the entire thing came to a standstill, because they had a flat network for every single thing, like every laptop, every server, every backup. They were all compromised. So this was a fun part of, there were ships anchored outside our harbor saying, I don't know which pier I have to go to, because that information was in a system that's telling me now to pay a Bitcoin. And I don't know what to do. I don't know which pier I have to go to. So that happened for Maersk. 80,000 employees. I got to speak to the partner at Deloitte who helped them fix this. They said, this is a story of how 80,000 people got a couple of weeks extra of holiday. And it took the last employee to get the last laptop. It took them 2 years. That guy didn't work for 2 years. It still got paid. It's amazing. The story here, I think it's one of innocent bystanders, but also story here, it's very old. It's already 7 years old, almost 8. So it's 7.5 years old. So at the time, there were innocent bystanders. Now, with LLMs, This is a lot harder. It's a bad opportunity because sophisticated attacks now are a lot more scalable with LLMs. In the past, I had to tell my CEO and my CFO, hey, there's a thing called spear phishing. You need to be careful with that, especially you, because you're the CEO and the CFO. People will target you. I didn't have to tell this to all the secretaries or to all the bankers or to all the non-essential IT staff because, come on, like, who's going to try to, check for Hans van Dijk and blah, blah, blah. But now with LLMs, you can just ask it to query a very detailed, interesting email that this person will click. And you can also create a crawler that's going to search the internet for whatever information this person might be saying. So suddenly, Hans van Dijk suddenly gets an email saying, hey, I loved meeting you at the golf club last week, because sometimes he said golf, and here's the proposal we talked about, and click on the link to find out more. And now as a security guy, I'm thinking, I have to explain spear phishing to every single person I know. That's a problem. And if sophisticated attacks are a lot more scalable with LLMs, the number of innocent bystanders that happened with Maersk is going to significantly grow. It was going to make also for faster attacks, and these attacks are going to start being AI powered, which is going to put a lot more stress on my defense mechanisms. And even though the capability of the attackers is growing exponentially, my budget as a CISO isn't, and that sucks. That's the bad opportunity when it comes to AI. Now, here's the ugly opportunity. AI is ripe to transform the way we live our lives, but it also has the power to significantly change the relationships we have with creating social divides, of racial injustices, and it has the power to increase the stereotypes that we already have today in our society. And therefore, I argue that using AI responsibly is not just a legal imperative, it is a moral imperative. And it's a moral imperative for all of us in the security field. Using AI responsibly is a moral imperative for all of us. That's what's ugly about this. Why do I say ugly? Because you might be telling your companies, look, AI is too dangerous or too difficult or too problematic, don't touch it. They're going to touch it. You can't stop this. So you have to know AI. You have to know how it works, and you have to know how to secure it, because you're that security hero. Whether it's goalkeeper or striker, you're the one that's going to make this secure. There are plenty of examples already happening. In the United States, they're calling federal regulators to call AI discrimination the new civil rights frontier. This has the power, when used incorrectly, and sometimes it's used incorrectly accidentally, but it has the power to obliterate and to create a situation that for generations, marginalized people will keep being marginalized. At Amazon, they had an AI recruiting tool that showed a bias against women, because of course it did. You feed it a bunch of data to say, this is all the people we hired in the past, this is all the people we didn't hire in the past. You figure out what's good or not, and of course, what is the AI going to learn? The same biases we have. So when you give a nice resume, which is kind of like on the fence, yes, no, but if it's somebody called John, the AI learns, I guess Johns are to be hired, and it's somebody called Mary, maybe less. And of course, if somebody's called Tiago, which is my name, which is a Christian name, sure, absolutely. And if it's called Mohammed, maybe a little bit less. So, because of course, that's what we used to hire Johns instead of Marys, and we used to hire Tiagos instead of Mohammeds. And so fortunately they scrapped it, but they definitely did use it for a while. And of course, in this country, I know this is Benelux, so it's just one of the 3 that we're servicing, but in this country specifically, we are not unfamiliar with scandals about algorithms making decisions, which led to downfalls of governments and then new elections, and everything is fine. I know, I'm an immigrant too, so I don't like it. But there's a way to do this well. You don't have to use AI and have all of this. There's a thing called explainable AI, which is really exciting, because on the top thing, what you see, a typical AI, Training data trains a machine learning process. It does a particular task that goes to a learned function, and then the user just gets an output such as, okay, I recommend that you hire this particular person. And you're like, okay, well, AI said so. I don't know what to do. But you can make AI be explainable, which means that the system outputs two things. First of all, the recommendation, say, hey, I really like John. I think you should hire him. And then also, which features did I base my decision on? And if you see that overwhelmingly the features are about experience or university or whatever, you maybe think, hey, this gives me a good feeling that this John is to be hired. But if it's like, no, it's like 87% it's the name of the person. Yeah, I didn't want you to make the decision based on that. Or the postal code, or where does he live, or also to a certain extent which school did they attend. Did they attend gymnasium or not? Does that mean that they come from a privileged background or not? Do they live in Palmer, in Amsterdam, or do they live in Wassenaar, or I think where it's where wealthy people live. So there's a solution for that. So what is our to-do list? And I'll finalize with this. For us who wants to be that striker, who wants to be the hero for our companies, for our clients, or for society as a whole, for the startups that we work for, or for the mainstream banks and IT technologies we might work for. What is our to-do list? I would say there are three things. First of all is a quote from the foreword written by the CISO of ABN AMRO, my boss, really nice guy, which I really like, which says, I believe that to secure emerging technology, security leaders must embrace and use new technology as early adopters to implement innovative security measures. I really like this quote because I think it's an imperative that we have as security people is to embrace new technology as early adopters. That's going to be my suggestion for our to-do list. When Gen AI started being a thing, if I go back to 2 years ago, because I take an interest in emerging technologies, I started to be the one that the people called and say, hey, you seem to understand this. Come join our meetings about risks and stuff to see what we do. And I was in such a lucky position because I was able to tell them, yes, I know it too. You might have heard of it, but I'm actually using it all the time. Not with bank data, of course. I'm using it with my own data or for my own needs. I see where it works and where it fails. I see that, there's a thing called AI hallucination. Have you ever heard of that? I've seen, sometimes it hallucinates. Sometimes it hallucinates a lot. I've experienced it. I know what it is. You've suddenly fundamentally transformed the dialogue you have with these people. So my advice is to be early adopters of technology, whether it is virtual reality headsets, or whether it is blockchain, or whether it is AI, use it, become an early adopter. Whatever the next big thing will be for your companies, you want to be the one that starts the discussion by saying, when they say, I have this new emerging technology, I think it's really cool, I want to try it out. You want to be the one that says, I know, I've been using it for 3 years, and I have great things that I've been thinking about and I want to talk to you. It fundamentally changes. If you're not an early adopter yet, I would encourage you to be. And if you're working with companies that are doing emerging technologies, well, I would recommend multiple books. It doesn't have to be this one. If you're interested, I did summarize it in a few hundreds of pages, but there are others out there as well. So be early adopters or learn about it. And the second thing is understand what are the idiosyncratic security flaws about the emerging technology you're dealing with. If it's AI, it's the adversarial attacks and the model inversion and the et cetera, et cetera. And for others, it will be different things, right? For blockchain, it's all about where's, it's a 51% attack and things like that you have to worry about. Storing the private keys correctly. That's the main thing. It's very interesting if get your hands dirty and you start working on it, you figure out, okay, if there's one thing you want you to do is just put that private key in an HSM. That's more important than anything else you might be thinking about because I've seen how powerful that is. You want to be the one that has that conversation. And finally, we must be able to speak their language. This is something that Irfan also talked about here, right there, in his podcast, talking about one of the learnings he has as being a CISO with an experienced CISO like he is. And I'm sure for a lot of us that's also true, the ability to speak the other's language. Because when we tell them there's an SQL injection and that's bad for you, they don't understand what it means, we have to speak it in their own terms. That's kind of like a soft skill that you need to develop, and actually hopefully you've been developing. But if you can be that technology, the emerging technology hero, I think. Because the pace of change has never been this fast, and it will never be this slow again. And for emerging technologies, you can be the ones who unlock these emerging technologies, make them go mainstream for your clients, for your companies, or for society. Thank you.